This is Raul Lopez, and you're listening to How Do You Say Success in Spanglish? The path to success isn't easy. For minorities and people of color, many attempt this journey with little to no guidance. Join me as I sit down with individuals who share their stories of perseverance so that together we can learn how to say success in Spanglish. What's good, mi gente? Welcome back to How Do You Say Success in Spanglish. This is Raul. Today we have kind of a very different type of interview. I have a buddy of mine who's a director level at a big pharma company. How's it going?
Hello.
Hey, so because of the level of his position, he does definitely want to have some anonymity moving forward. But he is going to dish out and give us some good content. So I guess to start off, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I want to be real because I feel like this is allowing me to say what needs to be said, to put it out in the open, because I think throughout all our lives we've had difficulties. We had to deal with things such as racism, sexism, a lot of different stuff. A lot of companies don't handle it very well, and they especially don't like it when you put it out in the open like that. Think Sackler family, but not that deep, right?
Yeah.
But there's a lot of truth to that. But I just want to say that right away, because
Yeah.
But anyway,
yeah. This isn't going to be something the CIA or FBI is going to be knocking on our doors to get down.
No, I just want to keep my job. I just want to be able to say what I want to say, and have my house and stuff.
Yeah. I got to pay the bills at the end, and that's fine. And you know what? Sometimes there's stuff that we need to talk about that we can't necessarily talk about for those same reasons, and especially in the public sector. So I really appreciate you taking the time to be here. So I guess kind of to start off, you work in biotech. Do you want to tell me a little bit about what working in biotech is like?
Yeah. I went to school. I went to BU actually, and for biomedical laboratories, clinical sciences. I think you actually spoke to someone else who did the same major there. He's the one that actually kind of put me on into it. And, I was going through some struggles in college. Go back to your first question. Sorry, I skipped over it, but it kind of, I grew up in Texas, lower middle class. I wouldn't say exactly poor, but there wasn't a lot of money to do other things, right? I did go to Montessori school from kindergarten through, what was it, 8th grade, I think? Yeah, so it was a little different way of teaching and learning and stuff. Then I went to high school, and my high school was kind of weird. There's this little subsection of like white, the ones that enveloped in that district or in the school area. Very rich, very white, but it was very minority. And that school had really good AP classes. We're talking like, even when my sister went there, they're doing like forensics and stuff like that. Like my sister dealt with cadavers.
Nice.
So it's really
in high
weird,
school.
but yeah.
Oh man, we couldn't even get like live animals because we couldn't afford it at our school. We had to do the digital one where you look online and you cut the fake frog and stuff like that.
All the simulation stuff. Yeah. But
like old 1999 computers. It wasn't VR.
But so there's this little subset, this little section cut out of that school that was really, really good, right? I was number like 80 something, like high 80s in graduating class, and I was a number 2 Hispanic male, and my GPA was 4.7. So that kind of gives you a look into how competitive that high school was, at least that little subsection was.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, there's kids that graduated my class.
You were top 80 and above 4.0.
Yeah, out of a entire school that was like 5,000 kids.
Holy shit! Yeah.
So it was really big, right? Mm-hmm. So that's kind of wild in the sense that there's this little section in the school where in high school I had to deal with shootings, stabbings, gang-related stuff. Like I'm talking to my wife. My wife grew up in South Shore, Massachusetts, and kind of really, really small town. I'm like, hey, do you ever get your ass kicked for wearing the wrong color T-shirt to school?
Yeah,
that's happened.
I mean, I was talking to a friend of mine the other day who started listening to the podcast, and we went to the same school, and she was like, even though we went to the same school, she lived in a nicer part of the city we lived in compared to like where I grew up with, or my other friend Persia, who I interviewed grew up in, and I was telling her, I was like, I remember my cousin Stacy, who was coming home from school. I think she was about my daughter's age. She was like 9, 10, walking from like second or third grade. And while her and her friends were walking back, a group jumped out of a car and beat the crap out of some dude on the side of the road with a bunch of bats. You know what I mean? And she ran home crying, screaming, like afraid that something
Yeah,
happened
that's
to her.
traumatizing.
Yeah, for like an 8-year-old, you know what I mean? For an 8, 9-year-old. And now I have a daughter who's 10, and I worry about her taking a bike down my suburban road by herself without me around. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So,
how times have changed, right?
yeah, it's
Like,
completely different. But growing up like that, you don't, it's if you didn't grow up with it, it's not normal.
yeah, I think it's. I mean, we can touch on this later, but a lot has to do with like the information flow.
Mhm.
Like you're allowed to see a lot more things now that are going around, not even just your immediate neighborhood, but the world and stuff like that. So I think that really feeds into it. But yeah, so high school was wild, and what kind of drove me to sciences was I was decent at math. I really like science, and specifically towards health science. My sister has special needs, so that really pushed me in that way. Um, but yeah, so graduated high school, went to BU, and actually, when I was a junior, I was really struggling. Right, freshman year was fine, totally fine. I did all AP classes my junior and senior year in high school, so first semester was a cakewalk, real easy. I didn't really take any of my AP credits just because I knew I had to ease into it a little bit. But after I got past that, it was an exponential bump of
Mhm.
like, oh wow, like this is a lot, right? Um, but I won't say it hampered me, but growing up and going through Montessori school, it's a lot of hands-on. It's a lot of tools that you have to do things. Like when you're dividing stuff, learning division in elementary school, you have these blocks and you break them up to, put them into the groups, right? To show your work. So going to a auditorium classroom style way of learning, it was rough.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it was hard to adapt to that. And then come junior year, I was really struggling. My grades were struggling just because we're getting into like some really complicated things. And I was in the School of Engineering at first. Everything was really theoretical. It was all bookwork, all paperwork, and I just wasn't into it. Looking back, I just didn't like the paperwork, and it really
Mhm.
worked against me, and I struggled. Then on some, uh, one of my fraternity brothers actually pointed me towards the Met College. I think you talked to a couple of other people that went
Yeah.
to Met and listened
Mhm.
to you others. Yeah, really good. Really, lots of Latino people there. Lots
Yeah.
of people of color. This is designed to be a night school, right?
Yeah.
For people who are working and whatnot. So I switched into Met College. Took on was it biomedical laboratories clinical sciences. Stupid, stupid long name for no reason.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And what it really was biotech. They're teaching you how to do cell culture, protein purification on a very, very small scale, and what it meant to be to have good documentation practices and things like that. So it was a lot more hands-on, and I enjoyed it. But I will say it was very elementary where I was like, wow, this is college. Like, oh, this is really easy. Like, so boom, my grades were great then. I go into lab, knock stuff out and leave. And it was to the point where I was helping everyone out with my buddy. I don't know if we have a friend we can talk about later who hung out with some of your friends from Rhode Island before.
Mhm.
But yeah, I won't name drop. But yeah, so it was like me and him, we paired up and we just knocked this stuff out, right? So it was really good. And then, I was struggling, didn't know really what to do with my life, didn't know what this would lead to. And fraternity brother reached out and said, hey, you want a job? I was like, what are you talking about? And he was like, Biogen is actually hiring right now for the manufacturing facilities in Cambridge, Massachusetts, Kendall Square, which is like the mecca of biotech. There's so many companies right there. So he was like, can you read? Can you write? Can you follow instructions? I was like, yeah. He's like, all right, you'll be fine. So, go to the interview. One of the guys that was interviewing me, he was like, yeah, you don't worry about this. Just, go through the motions and we're going to get you in there. So that's where I started. I was really pretty much a glorified dishwasher, washing parts that go to like bioreactors, protein purification skids and stuff like that, and matter that just had to be documented, and making like buffers and cell media, things like that. It was really easy, and the pay that I started out with, because I think it's really important because it kind of puts everything into perspective as we go through this and start talking about medication and cost and things like that, and get ultimately to the money. But I started at $40,000,
Yeah.
and you think, and that was just in that department. There's also people at my level in the departments that were doing the cell culture, that were growing the cells, that was taking that protein that those cells produce, which is the medicine,
Yep.
and purifying it. So you're talking about very low level. You really don't have to be skilled, because the idea of it is that you're following directions, like baking a cake, right? Using the back of a box to bake a cake. That's the general idea of good manufacturing practices, is to be able to follow a set of written instructions and be able to perform it, that you could be able to pluck someone off the street to a degree. Not totally, because there are also some competencies that you need to have, like being able to read and write and follow directions, right? And put them in this kind of role, and you make it, right? But what does that do? That keeps your labor very cheap.
Yeah, and it's in 40K in Boston is different than 40K in a lot of other areas. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's a high cost of living, so it's really on the low end for like a Boston job.
I think this data is old, probably by several years now. But the last article I read is that the poverty line is 70K in Boston. So if you're bringing in less than 70K, you're in poverty. So 40K then, it was probably a little closer, but it's definitely under the quote poverty line, right?
Yeah.
Of course, I was living with roommates and stuff like that. So our house, we weren't living in poverty. We just weren't doing a whole lot. But yeah, and we're talking about, I was a young kid. I was 21 at the time. But there are people that were working at that same level, not really making a whole lot more, that were in their 50s and stuff like that, right? So it's there's a lot of things in play with that. If you're able to move up, you can make decent money. I think when I ended up there, when I entered there, I was a level 2, but when I was a level 5 there before I left there, it was I was making 6 figures, right? But that was with overtime. That was working with holiday pay, which was triple time. So you can make all right money. I'm not gonna say good money, but you can make all right money, but it is a grind. Right?
Yeah, and just like I said, once again, we put things in perspective. 100K in Boston is very different than if you're doing 100K in South Texas or some other places like that, where your money can go a little further.
Oh yeah, you'll live like king.
Yeah, you know what I mean. So
money, right?
Yeah, so it's just to put in perspective. People think it's 6 figures. Man, I would kill to get 6 figures. Yeah, but we're talking about Boston. Same thing if you're living in like New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco.
Yeah, exactly.
Those places are definitely not going to give you the same return on that type of money. Oh, sorry, continue on.
No, it's yeah. So I left there just because that facility got sold off, and I went to a smaller biotech, which was in gene therapy, and it was more of a startup. I got out of manufacturing, but I used that knowledge to take to this, where I was going to a pilot plant, which you have research and development, which those are the ones that kind of discover more or less, right? Or take something that came out of university and just reproduce it, right? To say, okay, yeah, this does work. We can make this therapy. All right, now let's start putting into mice and see what it does, right? You have those kind of groups that run that. Then you also have like process development, which really is taking that really research stuff that's fresh out of the university or out of discovery, and then, all right, let's start making it a little bit bigger. Let's start seeing how we can make more of it, tweaking things to make it more efficient, to just help start bringing the cost down a little bit to make it, etc. Right? Then you have like, some people call it like pilot plant. Some companies call it technical development, which is really like, all right, that science is set. Like, this is how you make it. Now we're going to make it, instead of like 1 liter at a time in the bioreactor, we're going to make it like 250 liters of it, or 500 liters of it, or 1,000 liters of it. It depends on what you're doing, right? And that used a lot of my knowledge that I had from manufacturing, because you're starting to get to similar scale. And it was really just like, all right, how am I connecting this bioreactor? I need to get it to this pump to pump it all out into a big vessel, pretty much. How am I doing that? All right, well, I know I have these tubing sizes. I have these connection sizes. I just need to put it all together and write down the instructions, and that goes into manufacturing, and that tells them how to recreate what we did. That role was all right. My boss wasn't very hands-on.
Yeah.
I really wasn't going anywhere if I stayed there, or it would take a long time, right?
And what made you recognize that you needed to leave? Like,
well, they started cutting everything.
Okay, because a lot of times we'll work at a job and we're like, oh, if I keep working, I'll stay here and I'll move up. And then sometimes it's hard to read the writing on the wall and say, I should jump off this sinking ship before I get caught in it.
I think that's very different it's obviously different to different industries, but with the biotech, especially if you're at a small company, like let's take Eli Lilly, for example. They have a bunch of stuff on the market, right? So they have money coming in because they're selling medication, right? They're selling therapies. Startups, not so much. They haven't sold anything yet. They don't have anything to sell. They're just trying to figure out if this one thing they have can even sniff making it, right? Their first goal is to get it into the clinic to do a phase 1 trial to see if it's safe. The goal of the phase 1 trial is really don't kill anyone.
Yeah.
With the way venture capitalists have gone now with the scene is because it takes so long to get these from discovery to the market. And we're talking like 10 years, like a decade, maybe more, maybe sometimes less. And we're always trying to speed it up, right? Because you want to get to that revenue point. A lot of venture capitalists are looking for efficacy in the phase 1 trial. So a lot of companies are trying.
Can you explain efficacy just so?
Efficacy is how does it work, right? If you have a diabetes medication that's supposed to lower your control your insulin output, is it actually controlling? Is it not? So venture capitalists who are investing in these usually starts out private before they go public, do an IPO. They're really saying, is it worth it for me to keep pouring millions, and we're talking about millions of dollars, into these 50 people that, to make this therapy and get it towards the clinic, towards commercial, right? So if it's not really effective in phase 1 now, a lot of times things are getting dropped now. Like they're not even making to phase 2, which is usually your dosing. How little do you need? How much do you need? Find that sweet spot within the human body, right? So it's.
Not to get into super detailed regarding the practices of biotech, but in essence, there's a lot of potential drugs out there that could be beneficial that are being dropped early on because they're not as effective in the initial stages.
Well, they're not. If they're not effective, they're not going to be effective. Yeah. You can't sell it, right? And you got to keep it in mind, especially working in the biotech industry, and especially working on the startup side, as well as even if you're working for a larger company like I am now. I'm still in clinical, so most of the things that I'm going to work on and going to touch are not going to work. It can be really tough on people sometimes because they get caught up in it, right?
Right now, with COVID and everything that happened, a lot of people have different perspective when it comes to the idea of big pharma, essentially. You know what I mean? People get really it's hard sometimes for people to realize that there's people working on something, hoping for it to be successful and helpful, and then it gets dropped, as opposed to just seeing the big corporate side that says, oh, all pharma wants is money from us, which, I'm sure partially true, but, it is true, but there's still people in those positions below not making those big money that are putting their all into these
Oh yeah.
medicine.
Yeah, but I mean, but that's just honestly the people not making a lot of money in this chain
Yep.
are the people where I started out actually physically making the product,
Yeah.
right? You know, all the scientists and engineers. And funny thing is, throughout my career, I said I was in engineering school and I got out of engineering school. I didn't graduate with an engineering degree. At one point in my career, I was an engineer.
Nice.
Just from working in the field and learning the specifics of
Yeah.
what to do, right?
Mhm.
But you know, those people, they're making good money. They're making pretty good money, right?
Mhm.
They're making livable wages. They're making they're able to live a comfortable life, right? It's part of the reason why it costs so much too, right? Is, you know, who do you want designing it and
Yeah.
being in control of a clinical trial of stuff that goes, right? So I hear that, you know, what you said about the high cost of pharmaceuticals, but there is a lot of money that goes into it, and it is years. I think that's a problem that we need to work through as a people. Is, you know, how do we lower it?
Yeah.
Because it is quite expensive. But what that does is, I think it creates a culture of greed, right? Hey, look, I brought up the Sackler Family. That's pretty hot. Go. I'm plugging Netflix right now because it was pretty good. It's called Painkiller, I think.
Yep.
That's puts it into perspective a little bit, right? But I really, when it all comes down to it, no matter how, if it even has a barely working, it's going to get cut.
Yeah.
Why? Because it probably is not going to work as well when you get to the population to have to make it a whole big thing, right? A lot of volume is probably not going to work, right? I think Biogen came into some controversy about one of their Alzheimer's drug, where, don't quote me on the numbers now, I remember it was somewhat of like around 30% saw effectiveness, but also 13% of people had, I think it was 13. It was around there. I'm going to say it's around there. Had huge complications with their brain swelling.
Oh yeah, that's not good.
Yeah. So, and it's tough, right? And these are the ethical dilemmas that you get into this space. And being a person that, if I was still working at Biogen, how would I feel about it?
Yeah.
Because I mean, is the Alzheimer's patient making that decision?
Yeah.
No, they're not. It's their family member, right?
Yeah. You know, it brings up a good point too. I mean, this is just, once again, a little bit off topic, but you know, just as I got older and I've had my own dealing of health issues, you start weighing the cost benefits of what's the next step that you want to do to take on certain medications, certain procedures to help you move forward. You know what I mean? And that's on an individual personal basis. At not one point do I put, okay, now which one of that is going to make me more profitable and get me more money?
Yeah.
You know, so that's three factors of, you know, will this help? How effectively will it help? And then how much money can we make so that we can continue making more medicine?
Yeah. And I think I mean, if you're going into the biotech industry out there, people, you're going to come to face with some decision of, am I okay doing this?
And this is something that comes up, I mean, not just for pharmaceuticals, but, you know, there's times where I look at jobs and they're coming up and I'm like, oh, this is, they have openings for, you know, a big oil and gas company, like, or like a Coke industry. I mean, you're like, what companies am I ethically opposed to? I mean, when I started working at one of the jobs, it was called Bracewell and Giuliani. So it was with Giuliani, and he left like a year after I started there. But that was before we got the Giuliani we got now.
9/11.
Yeah. So you know, he was more, you know, this is the hero of 9/11 Giuliani, as opposed to the, you know, Trump supporting Giuliani that he is now. That he started getting, I think he went to another law firm and they kicked him out of that law firm.
Yeah.
You know, but it's at the same time, I had another friend at work and I was like, we're so glad he's not here because that would put us in an ethical dilemma. Like, do we want to keep working for a company that encourages this type of behavior? You know, and in all companies, you can dig deep enough to find something you don't like about them that you'll have to say, okay, where's my limit to how ethically bad this company is compared to what I want to do for a living? But I can imagine a pharmaceutical, everybody who hears you from pharmaceutical is going to give you some shit to complain about.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of propaganda that goes in these companies, as a worker, you know how many times I've been put on auditorium when someone comes up and says, I have this disease. What you're doing is very important.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, it is, but there's a price to that, right?
Yeah. Yep.
There, someone's got to pay for you to get that medication,
Yep.
right? So it's really just weird, and it's really off-putting. It was very off-putting for me. Why? Because a lot of these advocates were white.
Mm-hmm.
They're all white. And they all have like good jobs,
Yeah.
right? One of the small startups, it was a hearing company. So we were doing gene therapy in the ear, right? And it was really for the first indications that we were working on was for a protein that helps the hairs in your cochlea grow.
Mm-hmm.
So those vibrate, from the motion, the whole
Yeah.
whatever. Not getting ear anatomy right here,
Yeah.
but yeah. So a lot of these, and also you got to realize a lot of these therapies that, especially the rare disease, when you start hearing rare disease, deal with children, right? So for this therapy, it had to be administered to a child that was usually like 6 months,
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, they have this condition, blah, blah, blah. Or, so the parent is making the decision is, do I want my child deaf, or do I want to spend $1 million an year to effectively cure this? We'll just say that because
Sure.
it's a little more complicated.
Mm-hmm.
But the people that came to us and the patients were all older, but they're all white.
Mm-hmm.
They all had good jobs, and everyone's like, oh yeah, I'm a lawyer, I'm really interested in this. I'm just like, what the
Mm-hmm.
You never see anyone like us. And I will say there's this one company I worked for who made a clotting factor for, I think it was like factor 8 or something like that. For hemophilia. Hemophilia is you get cut, you're not going to stop bleeding because you're lacking some clotting factor of some sort. So they made this clotting factor. And the way they framed this donation to Senegal was, we're donating 1 million units to Senegal for children who have hemophilia.
Mm-hmm.
When, me being on the little technical side of it, I understood what that 1 million units meant.
Mm-hmm.
And it was only like maybe a few hundred doses.
Mm-hmm.
Like it was nothing at all. They said 1 million units because it sounded better.
Yeah.
Right. But they are only doing it one time though.
Yeah.
So you're giving these these children who have hemophilia in Senegal clotting factor, like, oh sweet, I can go play. I don't have to worry about getting bruised and stuff like that. And then it's all gone.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, like, this is kind of something you do with a lot of corporations when they start donating. You have to kind of read deeper into what they're donating. You know what I mean? And like lots of times, you see different companies you work at where they're like, oh, send some portion of your paycheck or donate some time for this thing. And then they put a big blast saying, we raised $1 million. I was like, well, the company didn't spend $1 million to go send out a donation to some cause. Yeah. They're doing it. I remember I used to work for a retail company years ago in high school, and they were, for Thanksgiving, they were like, we gave out like 10,000 pounds of pasta that they did. And I'm like, oh, that's cool. And then I look at the bags that we're selling. It's the same bags of pasta. And I was like, each one is like 2 pounds. And they're like 50 cents a piece. So it's like, when I did the math, I was like, I think they sent like $2,000 worth of pasta. You know what I mean? And it's like, it just sounds better when you pick out that specific unit.
Yeah. And
so when you're working and you're getting in here in biotech, how do you, obviously you're outnumbered, you're a minority in it of itself. And how does one get to move up in those companies to actually start making a difference?
I will say it's getting better. I'm just going to put that out the front. There are a lot more brown faces and black faces and queer faces and LGBTQ faces out there now. I think it's something that the companies are recognizing they need to like move towards, just because how much talent are you missing out at when you do stuff, right? It was like Amazon made an algorithm based on their past applications, and they realized this algorithm that was helping them with recruiting was excluding males. I mean, was excluding females. Why? Because all the applicants before were pretty much male, right? But anyway, so there are a whole lot more of people who look like us in the industry now. But earlier in my career when I was in manufacturing, I literally had someone in upper management sit me down and say, "You're not going to do anything because of the way you look." And I was dressed in a polo and slacks, and I was working on the manufacturing floor, which you're buddy suited up. You have gowning head to toe to protect the drugs from you, right?
Mm-hmm.
For environmental control. So I was like, I'm dressed professionally, especially overdressed for the position that I am in,
Yeah.
because I'm literally back there, you know, in a coat, pretty
Mm-hmm.
much. So it was that really pissed me off. And I was like, yeah, thanks. And I see how
It was
Brown.
it was that a helpful suggestion, or was he kind of like being a hater? Like was he
I
like
don't know. It still bothers me to this day of like I was wearing a polo shirt. I was
Mhm.
wearing khakis. My hair wasn't done because you're not supposed to have be wearing cosmetics back there.
Yep.
So I'm like, what? And I was just speechless
No,
on it.
I mean, it happens sometimes. I think sometimes we deal with stuff where, especially when you're brown skin, you know, when you're Latino, you sometimes you're in the middle between, especially when I moved to Texas, a lot of people that were racist weren't racist towards Latinos. You know what I mean? They
Yeah.
were black racists, but they were cool with Latinos.
You guys are all right.
Pretty much. You know what I mean? I don't want to say it, but that's how they act. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so you get put in certain situations where you're just kind of like, whatever, and in all different levels, and you'll hear some things where you're just like, that was kind of messed up.
Yeah.
Like, why did you say something like that? And they don't realize that you're not necessarily approving of it. And so I was at work, and it was after the Supreme Court made gay marriage legal in the United States. And I'm like, I forgot what event was going on, but we're just kind of an event. And then there's these two guys on my job, and one of them makes a comment about, did you hear what's going on? And this high level executive from our company was like, yeah, I know this country's going to shit. You know what I mean? And I'm just kind of like, whoa, you literally hired a few LGBTQ people and work with them and rely on them. And I'm like, okay. And that's kind of for me when I started realizing, yeah, I can go to work and I can meet people and be cool with people, but I still always felt like there was going to be something dividing me from certain people. You know what I mean? Like there was still a level of I can't necessarily put down my guard no matter where I am because I don't know what they're saying about me when I leave the room.
Yeah. And at that same company, all upper management was white. Everyone was white up, above like supervisor level.
Mm-hmm. And it's funny because when you go to a lot of companies, a lot of companies will, the company I work for now, and I really appreciate some of the stuff they do when it comes to diversity and inclusion, that they post data on, these are our demographics at work. This is the age group. This is the colors. This is the sexes. This is people who identify as LGBTQ, and stuff like that. And they're very open about saying, we're doing a good job, but we're not doing as great of a job in the executive level. Because a lot of companies will brag, oh, we are very diverse from this level down. When you start looking into the executives, the directors, the people running it, nice. And it's the same white men on the top usually. So
and I think that is a tale of the time of systematic racism.
Yeah.
And we'll connect the dots later.
Yeah.
But it all comes down to education, in my opinion, right? We weren't allowed much very education because of systematic racism.
Yeah.
So therefore, how can you have someone in those positions at this time when our generation, even our parents' generation, didn't have access to the kind of education a lot of these kids have now?
Yeah.
It will change in the future. Guarantee you it will change. It's just we're dealing with the aftershocks, I guess, of systematic racism, even though it is still here today. But it it's going to take time.
We could go through 10 episodes just on
it's wild.
Mm-hmm.
But so I think Christian Ponce hit it on the head but I think he could have taken it a little deeper.
Mm-hmm.
Where I want to go is that, like, hey, look nice, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You can be yourself, doesn't mean you're going to get the job, right?
Yeah.
So I went from looking nice to also acting a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
There's work me and then there's not at work.
Yeah.
P.
We talked a little bit about code switching with my interview
Yes, code switching.
with
Yes.
Peter, and I actually posted a video about it yesterday, quick, where he talked about it, and we also went a little bit more in depth with Christian and David, where we talked about code switching. But code switching is essentially being, switching how you speak and how you act. In any type of situation,
based on who your audience is, right?
audience is. Yeah, you know what I mean. So for a lot of us in our culture, oh, you're talking white. It's kind of
exactly, right?
what people tell you. Oh, why do you talk so white? You know what I mean? It's like, well, no, and then none of us have to be speaking, in certain manner to seem white. But even for me, it was getting rid of my Rhode Island accent. Like talking in the
I felt like I'm from Texas.
Yeah, exactly. Like not coming around and talking with my eyes like this and saying I'm going to go to work calling. And I got rid of that early on because I knew that was going to be detrimental to me in job interviews. I wasn't going to be able to come and speak my normal way that I've been raised to speak.
Yeah.
Because I'd lose work. I was already worried about my name because I can't hide.
Yeah,
Raul Lopez. I can't pretend. I've always thought maybe I should put Paul Lopes on some of my interviews and say I had a typo until I got the interview.
Portuguese.
Yeah, Portuguese or something. Yeah, exactly. But I was. But these were all the things I had to think about, and I'm like, how many job interviews am I missing out now? And I think things are a little better now because it's all algorithmic computers that are reading the information on your resume for a lot of recruiters.
Yeah, there's a lot of companies out there that claim they're doing blind hiring.
Yeah, and so like I've noticed. So like just to kind of put it out there, one thing I always do is I copy my when I get the job, I copy my job title for the job they give me, and I put it right on my resume, and that has all the keywords that they were using, and I just keep recycling. I use the same things, and I show up, and I've noticed that I started popping up on more recruiters' searches, and I'm getting called by more recruiters because all those keywords are there, and I don't have to think about it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, also you got to think at the end of the day, they need someone to do the work, right?
Yeah.
They need the most qualified person.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a at one of the companies I worked for, it was a small startup, and I was looking over the lab, right? So I had a really good relationship with the people who were the technical service, right? They're the ones changing out like LN2 tanks for some of the freezers where we keep our cells. They're the ones like cleaning some stuff. They're the ones like moving lab benches, moving equipment, stocking the inventory with common used like lab consumables like pipettes and things that people use, right? All black. All black, right? So we kind of could bond on the fact that we weren't white like everyone else in the company, right?
Yeah.
So it was pretty hilarious because I got this one package that I brought up from the loading dock, and it had our address on it, our floor and suite number, but I didn't know this name. And it was I'll wait to the punchline, but then I was like, hey, to the technical guys who was black, and he was like, I was like, do you know this person? He was like, they had hired no one named Laquanda at this place. And I was just like, oh my God. Like, okay, cool.
Yeah. No, it's funny because you'll go to different jobs and you'll recognize and you'll see certain systemic racist things that I don't think nobody really recognizes it except for the people in those positions.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like I worked at a job where we started realizing the person they keep putting into being responsible for stocking and storage of like the computer equipment, the physical labor aspect, because they're getting the computers, lifting it up, putting it down. It was physical. It was always a black guy. it was, we were like, hold on, that's like the fourth black guy in a row now that they put in that position, and it's, you're caught in a position of like, do we make a fuss about it, or do do we not, or do we just keep working and hope just to get out of there? You know what I mean? And it sucks sometimes, and especially when you hear stories of people who have actually fought racism at work and failed.
Yeah, exactly, right.
It's like, oh, now they do that. Now they're blacklisted and they have to leave. And I have friends who have fought in particular jobs that I worked at that have fought the system, and their only option was to gracefully bow out with a nice little exit package and pretend none of it ever happened. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
That goes with sexual harassment
Yeah,
and
sexual
things
harassment
like that too. And it comes down to if you're a full-time employee or you're a contractor as well.
too. Mm-hmm.
There's a contractor who, you commonly referred to in the industry as a temp.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and they're worked through a third-party company. They actually are work and paid by a third-party company. The company pays the biotech company or pharma company pays that company to staff them with people,
Mm-hmm.
right? This one young woman, um, she was doing something on a bioreactor and she was bent over, like trying to do a connection or whatever. And this guy, he was a creep. I hate this dude anyway. He came up to her and like dry humped her from behind. And guess who got reprimanded? The young woman who was contractor got let go. Yeah. Total wild shit like that happens all the time,
Yeah.
man. And
Yeah.
going back to your question of, how do you get around, just the racism and sexism and everything like to move up? It comes back to code switching, and you also have to live with what you just said.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes of like, what do I do? Do I just turn the other way? Self-preservation kind of thing, right? Do I raise something? A lot of companies are doing like anonymous tips,
Mm-hmm.
things like that, but I really haven't seen anything get resolved through that before. So it might work, it might not. I just haven't seen it.
It's so quiet on the results.
Yeah.
Like, one of the things you wish it would be that these diversity, equity, and inclusion departments would have transparency on the results on certain things. They don't have to name things, but just say a complaint was given about this and it was fixed. Obviously, they won't because they don't want to call out the bad stuff. But we never know if it's actually working or not. You can have anonymous tips, anonymous things, but you'll hear. And is that not just companies I work. I mean, I have friends in all over places in different companies that work that, and you hear stories about a high level executive that couldn't keep a female secretary. They had to eventually switch it only to male secretaries for them. Well, assistants, not secretaries, but administrative assistants had to be all male because they were kept getting sexually harassed.
Yeah.
And they weren't able to keep them. And then you're like, well, why didn't you fix the problem instead of just replacing it with a different solution? It's so yeah, no, it's kind of wild. And for a lot of times for us, we will you look back at like our parents and stuff they had to deal with, especially in Texas, and the way your parents grew up different from where you grew up, the way their grandparents grew up, especially in Texas, where a lot of people who spoke Spanish or looked Mexicans weren't given jobs, so they raised their kids to not speaking Spanish, not don't have an accent because they were parents trying to protect them from not being able to get a job. They didn't want them. So you have a big generation of Mexican Americans who don't speak Spanish, don't have an accent, probably have very anglicized names because their parents were like, we aren't going to let you suffer what we suffer. And so sometimes you suck it up and you go in there and hope that you get in high enough to the point where you can be vocal about things without risking yourself to an extent. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, now, when you get to a position where you're high enough, if you're vocal at a job, you're probably not going to be out of work for too long if something bad happened at that job, because of your experience, and I think sometimes we don't get that we need to wait till our experience is high enough to be able to stand up sometimes, and that's kind of the hard part.
And that's exactly kind of what I did. I kept my nose to the grindstone and gained these skills, make sure I was updating my resume and my CV appropriately to highlight these big terms, these big operations that I was essentially fluent in, right? I and worked my way that way. So, going back to my job history, I was in that pilot plant. Then I went back to another pilot plant for gene therapy, a different company, which was a larger company. And I hated that because they hired me at a very low level, but I needed to get out of my other company because they were cutting programs and it wasn't going to go anywhere. So, I went to this bigger company, but that wasn't going to go anywhere because of the big companies. It takes a long time to go up the ladder because there's so many people.
There's so many rungs.
And there's so many rungs. There's not a lot of headspace there. So the people who really like those kind of companies are just kind of like, I like doing my thing. I'm okay making this money for a while because you're only going to get maybe 3% raise every year, if that. When you switch positions, you can maybe get like 15, 20.
Yeah.
If you do it correctly, right?
And when you leave, and another thing, so you bring up good points. It's just kind of, I always like throwing in some tips that when we start talking about stuff that people listening. But yeah, stay in your position if you get raises, because not everybody gets raises.
Yeah.
It's usually really minimal. If you move up in a position within a company, it's usually 10%, something like that, really nice. But if you leave from one company to another company, it's always 20, 30%, depending on what you're pushing for.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so the jump is always higher leaving, and for a company it's always cheaper to keep someone, which is something a lot of companies don't understand, where they're willing to let you hang on the hook for a while in hopes that you'll get the position, and then you leave, and then they're stuck trying to figure out who's going to fill in that position.
It takes 6 months to get someone to backfill.
Yeah,
at least.
Yeah, and
right?
even when they get them, it takes them a year or two before they're in a position to understand it the way you did it, or if ever.
Yeah,
you know
exactly.
What I mean? So yeah, so lots. I mean, this is just a corporate issue where a lot of companies don't realize that, and it's a reason why I've left. And now I'm more of like the 3 years I'm moving up, I'm moving out.
Yeah. So yeah, I totally get that. In my career now, I'm looking to cruise. I'm making a good amount of money, and when you get to the VP level, like it really starts bleeding into your life. Like I've had VPs that I reported to directly, and they're all day, all night on their phone, the computer, doing stuff, right? Mm-hmm. I don't want that. I'm starting to hit cruise mode, making really good money for what I do.
Yeah.
And I'm fine with it right now, right? But to get to this level, exactly. It was honestly, the basis of it was code switching, knowing who you're talking to, what to say, how to act, just being a different person, honestly. And it sucks. It's a head fuck, honestly.
Yeah.
But hey, I want to be able to do things. I want to be able to help people who look like me, but you have to have money to do that.
Yeah.
So right now I'm in that stage of life of building capital. Still, I'm my upper 30s now, but still building that, then see what we can do, right? But yeah, to get to where I am now, it was code switching. It was stayed at a job for a year or two and then moving to another one, because that's how you do make the large raise. I doubled my salary in 4 years. Doing that.
Same thing. I mean, I in the last 5 years, I've doubled my salary, more than double my salary. You know what I mean? And it's just, and all I did was switch jobs. You know what I mean? And being open to listening. The one of the things too is like recruiters would call me, and now I'm like, okay, let me hear what you got to say. You know what I mean? Like before, I was like, oh, I've only been here for like a year. I don't want my resume to look bad. Yeah. But after a while, I was like,
people
I don't
care. As long as you can do the job, they're going to take a chance on you.
Yeah. You know what I mean? So, because we were raised back in things like, oh, if you don't show that you've been with a company and you weren't loyal for a time, they're going to wonder why.
Yeah.
And now it's like, they don't care.
They don't care.
And they realize that you might come here for a year or two. And one of the things I read on Facebook I think Facebook was like a post that I really liked, that loyalty to a company isn't staying there forever. It's being good at the job you're doing and doing your job the way you're supposed to while you're there.
Yeah.
Loyalty to the job is I'm loyal while I'm working for you.
Exactly. I'm loyal to you as long as you're loyal to me.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
It's a two-way street. And when they do all this stuff like diversity, equity, and inclusion, they do talks about the age difference and the different generations and the mentality. And I think we're kind of in the middle, where we're kind of more open to, we can stay loyal, but we're also looking to move out and improve, as opposed to the old generation that was like, we're sticking here for the next 25 years. And the newer generation that are just like, nah, you have to hit my spot that if I'm not happy working here, I'm not going to work here. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
And I think it's going to go more that route, and companies are going to start realizing that they need to have happy employees for them to stay.
Yeah. And in the biotech pharma industry, you see that in compensation, is that, up to I want to say my level, to the director level, you're a hired gun. You're brought in there to do a job, more or less. So in biotech, startups, and that's why I got out of there. I'm ready not to try to do a lot of stuff and do a lot of things that are outside my role, and I want to be focused now. But in general, I will say, just to generalize it, is that up to the director level, you're a hired gun. You're brought in to do one thing. You're brought in to do this role, who has these discrete responsibilities, blah, blah, blah. and that's reflected in salary pay, right? Now, when you start getting into like the VP, C level kind of thing, it's a lot about equity in the company, like stocks, RSUs, options, things like that. A lot of their deals, their salary, yeah, is greater than mine, but it's not as big of a gap for me from like levels below me, you know? So what that is for them to stay with the company, because these things vest over years, right? Like if a VP signs on, they get this stock equity plan, they're getting all these RSUs, but they got to be on for 2-3 years before they can even cash them out, right?
Yeah.
So, and hopefully the stock is still doing well,
Yeah.
right? But what that does is create the incentive for them to stay, and make it succeed,
exactly,
right? So
that's what I was gonna say. So the way you're putting it in is when you get to anything below this level, you're working for a position. Everything above that level, you're working to improve the company.
Yeah, exactly. But that comes with work-life balance stuff, things like that. And right now I come home and I turn off my work phone, or I turn on my computer, and that's it.
Yeah.
If you really, really need me, or if there's production going on that I got to look after, or working with someone in Europe, I'm going to have my personal phone on, or I'll have my work phone on or something if someone needs to get a hold of me, right? There are little concessions, but I think that's specific to my role and what I do. But whenever I have direct reports, I always encourage them just to disconnect, because it's not worth it, right?
Yeah. And the thing too that people don't understand is that if you don't disconnect, someone's going to take advantage of that. You're doing it. There'll always be that one person that clocks out at 5 and they're done, and there'll always be that person that works till 7 or 8, thinking, "Oh, it's going to help me improve." There's just going to be lots of times that I've seen there's another manager is taking advantage of you and letting you do that extra work to benefit them as opposed to benefiting yourself. You know what I mean? Really, it's a fight for yourself. You have to be selfish. You need to be able to be vocal about what you want and be able to come in there. And that's something that's taken me a long time to learn.
Yeah.
That I didn't come in there thinking, I was an immigrant. I thought I was going to come work. They're going to see how good I am. I've never had a bad review. You know what I mean? Like,
that don't mean shit.
Yeah. And so I was like, why am I such a great employee in all these reviews, but nobody's promoting me? It was like, well, and even when I asked, I'm just being led, like a horse with a carrot. You know what I mean? And it's like, I think about one of my last jobs at a law firm that I had. I was like, if I hadn't moved and left to where I am now, I'd probably still be barely touching 6 figures if I'm lucky, even if they had promoted me, give me a promotion with like a 10% increase, and slowly I might have just been breaking that. And then now I think I make too much that they can't afford me. You know what I mean? So it's like, but I had to be brave and I had to be selfish enough to take those risks and say, I'm going to go to another company and try something different.
Yeah. And I think, it's, at least for myself, when I'm in a management role, I'm trying to look for people who are good individual contributors and good managers. And it comes down to what extra things, because I do think extra things you take on can help in the long run.
Yeah.
Like to make the biotech and pharma industry, just to pick that, because it's way different, right? To go from like an associate role to like a senior role or a management role, you got to show that you can manage, right?
Yeah.
So you got to be able to display those competencies.
And so, just to clarify, I wasn't trying to say never do it. There's always going to be a situation where you need to come in.
Oh, absolutely.
There's always going to be a night where you're going to work till 2 a.m. getting something done because you need to get this done because it's going to cost, your job if you don't get it done. But it's just, there's people that go in there and they get abused. And
And they're not advocating for themselves, and they're just letting themselves do individual contributor stuff. If you want to do something extra, you got to do something that's above your level. Managing something, right? And there's a lot of times it just comes down to luck, honestly, and being able to seize the opportunity, which I think we both talked about with moving to different companies and things like that. I think that was actually aided by the market, where there was very low interest rates. So there's a lot of free money, essentially, right? So a lot of venture capitalists are pouring millions on it. Why? Because they can afford it now, because money's not costing them a whole lot, right? They can take on that risk.
And on top of that, it's not even just, being willing to seize the opportunity, but also recognizing when the well is dry.
Exactly. You gotta recognize the opportunity,
You
right?
got to recognize that I need to start looking for opportunities. You got
Yeah.
to start recognize that, okay, I just killed 6 years of my life at this job, and I've asked to be promoted 3 times and nothing's happening. I got to start looking, and don't even have to wait 5 years. You know what I mean? Like, start giving yourself a plan and say, this is what I expect my career. And I think that's a lot of people don't do when they start their job. They're just happy they have a job. They don't come in and they say, where do I, they tell you this is their interview question. And I've never been asked that interview question. Usually you hardly ever get asked that in real life. Like, where do you see yourself in 5 years? But that's really what you should be thinking about. Like, where do you see yourself in 5 years? What do you want to be? Are you looking to move up, or are you looking to get out and do something better? Or are you just trying to cruise for like the next 5 years?
Yeah, exactly.
So
recognizing it. And, I think specifically to my situation, especially within the last like 5 years or so, I told my wife this and her parents, because we always talk about it, right? It's like, I go to the highest bidder.
Yeah.
I had recruiters calling me every week, and I'm like, yeah, I'll bail it here. I've been here for 6 months. If you guys give me more money.
Yeah.
Because of these companies, these small startup companies at the time needed someone who knew what they were doing to come in and drive stuff, right? To come in to take it from R&D through development into the clinic as fast as possible.
And the nice thing with startups is sometimes they're so small that you can fill in many hats, that you can learn a lot of different things.
Exactly.
You could learn a lot more broader stuff and different things that you'll be able to use in your career. But there's stuff that you might not have done specifically. You know what I mean? And in startups, hoping they do well and they succeed, when you're there early, you can make a bigger impact.
Yeah, especially if you have a lot of equity when you first start up. Mm-hmm. That will definitely inflate. But I mean, working with small startups, it did, give me opportunities to expand my skill set to things that I hadn't done before, haven't really seen. But it also gives you access to the C-level, like CEO. Like, we have meetings with the CEO like every week because it's such a small company, right? And you get to see how decisions are made at that level and what it means, at least to what you're privy to, right? So that's definitely a big advantage of that, is being able to just see how you think in a bigger picture rather than so narrow scope of what is in front of you, But yeah, honestly, the market has tightened up a little, obviously, with inflation, the interest rates are up. It's not that many things out there.
Yeah.
I did seize an opportunity recently, and I knew I wasn't going to be able to negotiate as hard because the market's a little bit drier now. But also, thankfully, good timing. I was ready to get out of the startup stuff. I've already dealt with all that, worked my ass off. I'm just tired.
Yeah.
So I'm in the big pharma now, just a cog in a wheel, and really just going in, doing one thing, doing it well, and going home and making even more money than I was making before. It's win-win. Yeah, honestly, for just the stage I'm at, what I want to do right now, and I'm content so far.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the things that keep coming up through all our discussions with all the people that I'm interviewing is being open to risk, open to taking a risk and taking, jumping on an opportunity when you see it. And sometimes, I mean, it was the same thing. I had a conversation with my wife, years ago. I'm like, I'm stagnant. I'm not going anywhere. Like, I need to take a look at jobs that are different than what I've been doing to learn something different that'll be, help me out. So I took my job and I was a consultant for a CRM company, and I loved that job. They're a cool company. I really liked them, a startup from the UK. And I was doing so much different things, project management, consulting. I was kind of a business analyst while being a project manager. So I was doing so much little things. And then literally like within 3 years, and it was nice to that company because they kind of give you, if you do this and this, you can go into this path and this path. But within 3 years, I got called by a recruiter for a job I had now, and everything that I did at my old job, which was very specific to what they needed, plus the fact that I was able to be a consultant, do requirements, manage projects, all that combined together to help me get the position I am now. Yeah. But being willing to come in there, and now I'm in a position where it's more, I'm in a lot more control than I am with my specific project than I ever been in anything. You know what I mean? So sometimes you have to be willing to go out there and try something different and not be afraid of change.
Yeah,
If you
exactly. It's about what's right for you at the time. There's this dude that I know he's done it twice. Is that as soon as like he sniffs the company's about to be bought or something, he's out. Right? Well, he has kids and stuff.
yeah.
He can't afford that volatility of
Hmm.
will I have a job?
Exactly. Yep.
Am I going to get laid off in just a severance of like a few months? That
Hmm.
he has to find a new job. So it's he always all right. Started looking, got something, and got there right. Um, but yeah, stars are volatile. Um, Definitely ready in my life for that stability, focus, and
Yeah.
everything that I have now. My current roles, I can see it's still pretty new, so I'm figuring out. But yeah,
Nice, man. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to kind of talk about your journey and talk about certain little topics here and there that will hopefully help out people. And I really hope to have you back to kind of deep dive into some of these more specific things. So
yeah, let's do another one soon.
yeah, this was fun. So, and this is my first live one in person with someone. So
Yeah,
this is a slight difference from being on Zoom. So I really appreciate it. So, but to everyone else listening, once again, I'd like to thank you for your support and tuning in. And I hope you join us again next time as we continue to learn how to say success in Spanglish.